Hey, Clayton, why did Jesus need to try 2 times to heal that man in Mark chapter 8? Okay, good observation here, whoever sent in this question. Mark chapter 8 has this curious story. It starts in verse 22. It says, they came to Bethsaida, and some people brought a blind man and begged Jesus to touch him. He took the blind man by the hand and led him outside the village. When he had spit on the man's eyes and put his hands on him, okay, that's weird enough by itself, Jesus said, do you see anything? He looked up and said, I see people, but they look like trees walking around. Okay, not very clear vision here. Once more, Jesus put his hands on the man's eyes, and then his eyes were opened, and his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. Jesus sent him home saying, don't even go into the village. Okay, another one of those times where Jesus is saying, don't tell anybody. Try to keep this a secret. But what's going on here? Why did it take 2 times for the man's sight to be restored, right? Couldn't Jesus have done it immediately? The first time was like, kind of like when you have got a pen and you got to like shake it to get the ink out. It's like, oh, this was working before. Okay. Oh, here we go. We got to do it. Like, what was going on here? Did Jesus like kind of run out of power? Like, here's what I think is going on. I think Jesus is actually performing a living parable, a kind of an acted out parable. He does this a few times in the Gospels where he doesn't just tell a story to illustrate the kind of spiritual state or the condition of the people around him. He actually performs an action that is illustrative of what's going on with people. So in this case, I think he's actually acting out the experience that the disciples are having at that moment. If you read a little bit earlier in Mark chapter 8, you have the disciples very confused about things. Jesus is teaching and they're like, what's going on? And they totally misunderstand some things and they do not know what's going on. And Jesus is saying, like, don't you get it? Like, why is it so hard for you to see? And then this story happens, okay? The blind man gets partially healed where it's like, oh, I'm starting to see, but they kind of look like, like trees, it's like kind of fuzzy, like, clumps of things over here. And then he gets fully healed and he can see completely. Well, then you read the very next story. Okay, the very next story that happens in Mark chapter 8 is Jesus says to the disciples, who do you say that I am? And Peter says, you're the Messiah. And so that's seeing, right? These guys who didn't get it before, suddenly their eyes are open. They're seeing something. They're seeing, oh, we know who Jesus is. He's the Messiah. But then Jesus says, and you know what? You're right. And that means I'm going to have to go die before I can be raised from the dead. And and the disciples hear this and they're like, what? No. You are not going to go be arrested and tortured and die. The Messiah doesn't do those things. And Jesus has to say, get behind me, Satan, right? To Peter, he has to say, you don't get it. You're not seeing these things. You don't understand what God has planned here. You're misunderstanding it. So you see what happens? Peter has a partial understanding. He recognizes that Jesus is the Messiah, but he doesn't recognize that he has to go suffer. And so he's like a guy who's seeing kind of a blurry vision. It's like, I see the man, but he kind of looks like a tree, right? But then here's the interesting thing. If you keep reading into chapter 9, what happens next is the story of the transfiguration. Jesus goes up on a mountain with Peter, James, and John, and he is revealed in all his glory. It is shown what Jesus really is like. After all of these chapters of Jesus keeping it a secret, don't tell anybody, he reveals to 3 people exactly who he is. It shows him in all of his glory and who he is as the God-man here. And he's seen for who he is. And so it's almost like this is the moment when the disciples' eyes go, oh, that's what Jesus is, right? So you get this image of not seeing, partial seeing, and full sight with the experience of the disciples. And so I actually think that this miracle is a kind of little parable showing what's going on with the disciples. Thanks for listening. If you've got your own questions, email questions@BibleSavvy.com. Like and subscribe to catch our regular episodes every Monday on the Bible Savvy Podcast.